This is going to be my February wrap. I know we said a little while ago that we're not going to do any more wraps or Friday reads or any of that sort of nonsense. But since we stopped doing them, I found that I've really missed them. The act of just talking about books improves the books for me. So that's what we're doing here. We're talking about books because it helps me remember them and it improves my reading experience. Hello, Bryn. Where's your mum? Go get your mum. You're cute, but your breath stinks. Well, come on. Up. Turn around. Sit down. Look at the camera. Look at the camera. Yeah. I don't think you want to be here. You've not read anything. You're notoriously fickle, aren't you? You've got no concentration and you can't finish a single book. That's what I thought. I can see it. You're ashamed. I'm going to talk about the books that I've read in February and also some of the books I've read in January, just to catch you up. It's going to be really laid back, casual. I've not scripted this. I don't have a plan. I don't know what I'm doing. It's going to be great. I'll probably do these videos whenever I feel like it. I don't know whether I can do them monthly, do a Friday reads, do it every 2 weeks. I think I might do it after about a dozen books, but they will be coming back regularly. One of my goals this year has been to DNF books more. So I want to DNF 1 in 6 books that I start. So that means that for every 5 books I finish, I need to DNF a book. And the first book I read for the year, I DNF'd after 7 pages, and it's Scoop by Evelyn Waugh. I've read some Evelyn Waugh in the past. I'm a little bit frustrated by Evelyn Waugh. I quite like Brideshead Revisited. I thought Vile Bodies has quite a bit of merit, but I always want Evelyn Waugh to just be a little bit better than he is. It just doesn't quite fit with me. One of the things that I don't like, his language is so jumpy, and in this, somebody is doing a crossword puzzle or playing Scrabble or something, and they're having a communication, and then halfway through it, they're talking about the word that they're coming up with. I'm like, what's this got to do with... It's confusing, and then when I realised what was going on, I was like, why is this in there? Have a bit of respect for your readers. I mean, I'm not the most intellectually gifted person, Evelyn, and could you just make it a bit easy so I could appreciate, the good stuff instead of worrying about crossword hints or whatever it was. I'm going to continue with DNFing. I'm going to tell you about all the books I've DNF'd so far this year, but I'm going to skip a whole bunch because I've either got videos coming out for them or I've spoken about them in my testing my assumptions about romance or fantasy or science fiction, which is coming soon, or any of them. I DNF'd really quickly The Witch of I by Catherine Nuremberger, and I don't remember why. Also, Fucked at Birth, Recalibrating the American Dreams for the 2020 by Dale Maharidge. I don't know why I DNF'd it. It didn't make an impression. I've actually DNF'd a bunch more books, but I'm not going to talk about any of them. I'm actually up to 10 DNFs for the year already, which is slightly ahead of where I want to be, so I'm quite successful at doing what I want to do. I have very few low ratings to talk about as well, so this is going to be all killer, no filler. The first book I finished for the year was Blue is the Warmest Colour. I think I got a copy. It's a graphic novel. It's a queer coming of age. It's a sort of a lesbian romance, queer coming of age story. It tackles the parents' acceptance of this girl coming out as gay and the girl's acceptance of herself. It's quite a sad novel. In a video earlier this year, I talked about Nell laughing while I was trying to read a sad book. This was the sad book I was trying to read while Nell was laughing her head off next to me. And I thought she was a horrible person. So when you can see here, it's all black and white just with a little bit of blue in there. And I think that this is a really effective way of doing it. Let's see. It made me sad. I quite liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Recommend. The next book I'm going to talk about is Rabbits by Terry Miles. This was a buddy read with BookTube with Amy. This is a weird novel. I was not sure whether we were science fiction, whether we were dystopian, whether we were horror, what was going on. I think the book wasn't too sure itself. There is this game called Rabbits, and by investigating the game, you sort of end up in danger and end up playing this game, which is somehow going to end the world. It's all very confusing, a bit of a red hot mess. I was interested until the end. I wanted to know what was going on. I sort of thought that it would all come together at the end, but it didn't really, and it was a bit of a mess, and I ended up giving it 2 stars. Buddy read this with Amy, and she was of a relatively similar opinion. It did entertain me, but it wasn't good. Let's talk something that'll get people upset. The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Aguaga. So I've read The Memory Police by Yoko Aguaga, and it is legitimately one of the worst books that I have read in 2021. And in 2022, I didn't really like The Housekeeper Professor either. This deals with a woman coming to work as the housekeeper for a maths professor. The maths professor doesn't have a memory that lasts more than 60 minutes. 80 minutes? I don't know. Some short period of time. And he has like notes attached to him. And it's like their relationship, and you get to learn who the professor is without memory. It's a cool idea. But it's a bit slow and pointless and plotless. And it's just not my sort of book. I read it based on Nell wanting me to read it. Nell wants me to read it because she thinks it reminds her of us. Me being the professor, because I basically have no short-term memory or long-term memory. Who are you? What am I doing? It's charming. I definitely think that if you are the right sort of reader, this will suit you. My real reason for not getting along with this is it's a bit too slow paced. I've sort of this year started to realise how important pacing is for me. Books that are too slow paced, I just don't get along with. And this is a bit too slow paced and a bit too plotless, but it's quite competently written, and for the right reader, this is clearly going to be an excellent read. Just a character portrait of this weird man and how he interacts with this housekeeper and her son, and they're all very distinct. The characters are well drawn, so I definitely think that there's a lot of good here. I didn't get along with it. Other people will love it. I've already got a video out about this titled The Saddest Book I've Ever Read, because it is the saddest book I've ever read. This was a 5-star read. This is probably the best book of the year I've read so far. It's about friendship and euthanasia assisted dying, and it packs a punch. I very much recommend it. If you like miserable books, just go out there and pick this one up. Just so good. Most people, they'd get their books out before they started shooting a video. Got a single book review out for this one. 5-star book, very good, about grief. Something that won't be for everybody, but if it is for you, you'll love it. So it's a good one to take a risk on. Another one I have a single book review out on is Nothing But My Body by Tilly Lawless. It's the story of a queer sex worker in Sydney. Wasn't quite as successful a book, but I still think it's very much worthwhile reading. The Discomfort of Evening by Marieke Lucas Reinveld. This won the International Booker Prize, not last year, but the year before. It deals with this young Dutch girl who loses her brother in an accident, and her way of dealing with it, and her parents dealing with it, and dealing with the world around it. It's one of these books that I don't know why literary fiction does this all the time. I'd love a video if somebody out there would like to do this at a video. Why does literary fiction so often mention snot and feces and cum and all of these bodily excretions to know, and things going up the anus is such a common thing in literary fiction, and I'm not talking about kinky sex. And this is one of these books, and for all of that, I don't really know why I did it, and I didn't really get on with it. Maybe it went over my head. I think maybe it did, but I just didn't like it. 2 stars. Sea State, A Member by Tabitha Lasley. This is a memoir of this journalist who decided to go and work up in the offshore oil mines in the North Sea off the coast of the United Kingdom, and these really strongly male-dominated communities, and how she lived in these communities. Her aim was to sort of like learn about men when they're just around men. And in this book, she sort of mentions the problem with that being that she's a woman and the men aren't going to be men if she's around. It's also like brutally frank. She falls in love with a married man and is the other woman in a relationship, and she's talking about what's going on there with her new man who leaves his wife for her. It was a worthwhile read without really doing anything brilliant. I felt like it definitely spoke more about being a woman than it did being a man. I felt like it became quite a feminist memoir because, you know, obviously a narrator, a memoir, obviously Tabitha is a girl, and the way men treated her was sort of like a very big part of this. She also, you know, gets this reputation as a homewrecker. She gets abused. dealing with the men and how they sort of acted a little bit like children. And at one point, she was talking about the food that they ate, and these are men from the north of England, and all they really wanted to eat was chips and eggs, which probably doesn't hit all your food groups. I thought it was informatively interesting without being an excellent read, and I gave it 3 stars. The White by Tony Birch. This is a book that I'm hoping to do a single book review of at some point soon. Tony Birch is an Indigenous Australian author. The White Girl is the story of a Indigenous Australian lady and her granddaughter who is significantly whiter than her grandmother, and their trip into the capital city, an unnamed capital city, which is pretty clearly Sydney. It deals with sort of the mistrust that Aboriginal people feel towards white people, and how white people mistreat Aboriginal people, but mistreat them through good intentions or self-serving means, sort of not with the intention to be racist. I thought that Birch wrote with a lot of empathy towards his white characters as well as towards his black characters, which elevated the book for me. I thought that really improved it. I think this is a very, very good book. And if anybody is looking for a recommendation for Aussie April next month, I would definitely think that Tony Birch would be an author you should be checking out. Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. This is a short story or an essay by George Orwell. I think it's about 8 pages long. It details how, as a policeman in Burma, or Myanmar, but it was called Burma back then, he shot and killed an elephant who was terrorising a village. Through this act of shooting an elephant, Orwell examines the role of the British in Burma, the role of police, and the racism that is going along. This is a real controversial book in our house because Nell likes elephants, and Orwell shot one, and he really didn't need to shoot one. And that's sort of the point of this book. I thought this was fascinating. It's only 8 pages long. We're talking something you can read in 15 minutes. And I just think that go get yourself I'm sure you can find a free copy somewhere. Go get yourself a free copy, read it. I like Orwell's writing. And it was apt and on point, and he clearly got it, even though he was part of the problem, and being able to sort of look back and realizing the damage that he was doing, although maybe not with an elephant in mind. Maybe we're talking about the Burmese people. If you're an elephant lover, it's going to be a pretty tough read. But that's sort of a fascinating input into racism in Burma. The Half God of Rainfall by Inua Ellams. This is again quite a short story. It deals with a Nigerian man who is the son of a god and is a demigod, and he starts to play basketball and win, and then Zeus looks at him and says, no, this is not how things should be. So we have this sort of like weird blending of Nigerian folklore and Greek folklore, and then this Nigerian travels to America and tries to win basketball matches. I think that this is a fascinating premise for a book. Again, I think this is a really, really worthwhile read, but it just doesn't quite come together. I actually think that this book could have been like one of these really excellent novels, and it's not quite there, and that's really disappointing. It's still just an interesting read, and it's a little bit of fun, so I would recommend it. Nice short read, so if you've got it, I read it as an audiobook on Scribd, and I think it was 3 hours. Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Rivka Galchen. This deals with Johann Kepler's mother and the accusations that she was a witch in her lifetime. If you haven't studied enough science to know who Kepler is, Kepler was quite a famous astronomer of his time. His laws, Kepler's laws, are still used in sort of astronomy today and deal with the orbit of satellites around an object, such as planets around a sun. He was a contemporary of Isaac Newton. And he's quite a brilliant figure in mathematics and quite an important figure. And so the idea of writing a book about his mum, who was accused of being a witch, is really quite fascinating, because I feel like we have this like coming together of two worlds here, of science and religion, and at this time when these two worlds wouldn't have been as separate. And I thought that this would be interesting. And it wasn't. It was really poorly executed. I just didn't get along with the writing, and I would not recommend this one. It was quite feminist, and I did enjoy that, and I did enjoy how it sort of pointed out that the witch trials were a kangaroo court, but, we get that. Witches aren't real. I mean, I'm reading you from a point of view that witches aren't real. That shouldn't be the most interesting thing in the novel. I was one of the hosts of the Equal Rights Readathon with Terry Pratchett. By the way, there is a Mort Readathon if you're a Discworld fan, which obviously centers the character Death. So if you wanted to read about Death in the Discworld universe, it's a fun read. And that's happening next week. But Equal Rights deals with this idea that a witch can't be a wizard. I think that this was a really interesting book in the cycle of Terry Pratchett as a writer. This is the third novel in the Discworld universe. I felt the first two were a little bit sexist, and then Pratchett is now sort of undoing his sexism by examining gender roles in a novel, which there's a discussion that Katia, Rosie, myself and Kevvie did on Katia's channel. I think anytime you're talking about gender roles, you are very close to talking about trans issues as well, and Kevvie talks about how she found trans issues in this, so that's a sort of an interesting discussion. If you've read that, go and check that video out. I thought that this was a good book, but I think that one of the issues that this book has is that nobody quite gets their comeuppance. We have a lot of women being oppressed, and we have nobody really ending up with egg on their face for trying to oppress these women, and that's something that I would have liked to have seen. But overall, I think that this is just a fun, good book. Discworld is so funny, and it's always making fun of the real. Centuries of Change by Ian Mortimer. I saw this discussed on Charlotte's channel about 18 months ago. It just sounds like a fascinating concept for a non-fiction book about which century in the last millennia underwent the most change. The assumption being that it was the last century, and that being an assumption that really needs to be challenged. I thought that this is just so interesting, talking about how everyday people lived and the changes to their life. Starting off 1,000 years ago, where people would be, risking their life to travel to the next village because of bandits and the lawless nature of the world. Wherewith now, you'll go to the next village to have a drink, to pick up some bread. This is really Western focused, and Mortimer does say that, and just, says it's too hard to do this for multiple cultures because... So that's a criticism of it, but I do accept Mortimer's statement that it's too big a scope for one book. I just thought that this was a very good non-fiction read, very entertaining. I think Ian Mortimer's got a reputation. He's done all of those time travel novels where he talks about life in a different time, and I've not read any of them, but I think I will. I think Mortimer is just the sort of non-fiction writer that is easy to read and ultimately very interesting. John Crew's Devil by Marlon James. I've had a real interesting time with Marlon James. I absolutely adored Brief Histories of 7 Killings, one of the finest books I've ever read. From Black Leopard, Red Wolf was pretty terrible. And John Crow's Devil deals with these two religious men having this sort of fight, combat. One man turns up and whips the other man in his court and kicks him out of court, and it deals with these two men and how they live. Very much a sort of a magical realism fantasy sort of novel. It's just another one that I didn't get along with, I have to say. I feel like James is writing at too quick a pace for me to connect with the characters in this novel. And I felt like that's something that he didn't do in Brief History. It's something that he did do in Black Leopard, Red Wolf. He just needs to, if you want to read for character, you need to have it just a little bit slower. I mean, at least I do. If I want to empathize with a character, I need to just have that time to understand what's happening with the character. And I don't feel like I was allowed that in this novel. And when we're talking about the mistreatment of people due to religious beliefs, I really feel like that's actually an important thing to do. I think that this was Marlon James' first novel, and you can definitely see talent there. You can definitely see him becoming this, Booker Prize winning, excellent, author that we need to read more of. But this is maybe not the book that I would recommend reading if you wanted to get into Marlon James. I mean, just read Brief History of Seven Killings if you've not read it, and ignore this book. The Year of the Hare by Arto, Paasilinna. I'm going to be honest with you. One of my goals is to read a book from every country in the world. And one country that I have crossed off with this novel is Finland. And I read this book because of that goal and not because I wanted to read it. And I shouldn't have done that. I should have just hunted a bit harder for a Finnish book. It's a book that I'd had on my TBR for about 4 or 5 years. You know, it sort of got to that point of, well, you read it or you don't. It deals with this man who, he's in a car with another man and they hit a hare as it's running across the road. He picks the hare up and sees that the hare is mostly okay while it's still alive, and he runs off into the wilderness. It's his rebellion against society and how he chooses to act differently. It does have a sort of very gentle Kafkaesque feel to it. It is a sort of a man versus society monologue, and that's sort of interesting, but I just don't really feel like it went anywhere or said anything. You know, how society forces us to conform is a cool topic, but I sort of need it to say more than society wants us to conform. And I didn't really like this. I didn't really like how women were depicted in this either. So it ended up being a 2-star read. Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. This is an interesting short story, novella, I don't really know, about a man who loses his wife and sort of somehow manifests that into this crow that he sees. He has children, and it sort of goes through the healing process with this crow. It's quite a literary novel, maybe a little bit too literary for me, but I did enjoy this book without thinking it was anything excellent. The next one is If Beale Streets Could Talk. This is a 5-star read. Absolutely love this by James Baldwin. We have a book review of this. It deals with this woman and her husband who ends up being accused of rape, and it's a rape that he didn't commit. Talks about how the police are sort of mistreating black people and how this man is framed for the rape, and how that sort of has happened through a legal standpoint. I just think Baldwin is absolutely brilliant, and if you've not read any James Baldwin, read James Baldwin. If Beale Street Could Talk, fantastic book. An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed by Helene Tursten. So last year I read An Elderly Lady Is Up to No Good, the first book in this series, and that was an absolute delight. It deals with Maud, who is a cranky old lady who ain't taking no shit from nobody, and she basically murders people who gets in her way. She's a bad character, and I love it. And in the book 2, we sort of see a bit of a redemption of Maud. We try and humanise her and give her a happy ending, and I do not want that for Maud. Maud can go along killing people until she gets caught or she dies. That's what I want from Maud. I want cranky old lady murdering people. I don't want to see that she has a heart. Normally, I want to get along with my characters. Normally, I want to feel what they're feeling and understand things. Nope. This is fun escapism. I just want Maud to murder people because they make her cranky. That's what I want. And Helene Tursten, don't make it happy. Don't make it happy. Don't give it a nice ending. Didn't like this book. 2 stars. In the Company of Men by Veronique Tadjo. This is a real interesting blending of non-fiction and fiction. It tells the story of Ebola in the Ivory Coast and the neighbouring countries and communities through the folk tale of the babao tree. This format is sort of mind-bogglingly weird. What is also mind-boggling is Ebola. Ebola's scary and just really, let's face it, it's interesting. We're all like just being locked up because of COVID, something that kills less than 1% of the people. We nearly had an Ebola outbreak, and that kills about 50% of people. That's scary shit. Ebola is scary, and this book taught me so much about Ebola. It is a fiction novel, but there are just so many facts and interesting bits about non-fiction in it. You can get blood tested and be Ebola-free, and Ebola can, migrate into your bones or your eye or your liver or another part of your body and not come up on that blood test, and then later on you can get it, or then you can give it to somebody, or that it can change the colour of your eye. That's scary and really interesting, and I thought that this was just such a wonderfully complex, and I've just said it so many times, it's a real interesting novel. what I learnt about Ebola reading it was worthwhile. I'm not really sure that it works as a work of fiction, but I really enjoyed it. 4 stars. Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. This is a novel of these 2 children who are bullied in high school and the friendship that they have through sending letters to each other. Mieko Kawakami can write. She can really write. And I felt really quite sad for these characters. I was really uncomfortable. The level of bullying, the trauma that they feel, it was horrible. And I thought that was fantastic writing. What Kawakami does after that, I'm like, what is she doing? This tense, emotional novel that maybe we could be discussing self-harm and suicide. Maybe we could be discussing isolation. Maybe we could be discussing all these things. It just becomes overly philosophical and disappears up its own anus and wastes the brilliant beginning it has done. And this is so devastating because Kawakami is a fantastically talented and brilliant writer. Why can't she write a good and complete novel? Still, I gave it 3 stars. Fight Night by Miriam Taves. It deals with three generations of women living in Canada. It's told through the youngest generation, and I love this book. There was something that I really related to in these characters. How they just did not get along with society. How they were constantly upset by things. The way capitalist society has treated these women and the way they are fighting back against it is interesting. But the mother, how she gets upset at squirrels and the post office and all these things which aren't actually the problem, but she's just so frustrated that she takes it out on the wrong things. And I just could not help but to empathise with this character. I think that Miriam Taves has really hit on the disaffected people who feel like society is not for them, who feel like they don't fit in with the vast majority. If that's you, and I think that will be a lot of people who watch this channel, then read this book. You're going to see aspects of your personality in these 3 characters. And then, on top of this, it's just so funny. One of the funniest books I've read all year. Without, like, it's not a comedy. Don't go in and expecting it to be Terry Pratchett level funny. But when it is funny, it really does make you laugh in a way that reminds me of Patricia Lockwood. I absolutely love this book. So, high recommendation to Fight Night by Miriam Taves. I can't believe I had not read any of her works before, and I certainly will be reading a lot more of them now. Brilliant. Canada, stop hiding your best authors. And the last novel I want to talk about is Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. I just finished this one yesterday. We're in Holland. We're in The Hague. Not Holland. We should call it the Netherlands instead of a state in the Netherlands. We're in The Hague. We're dealing with a translator who is translating for this African dictator who has been captured and is put on trial. And the dictator is sort of criticising the West for saying, why when you consider everything that's going wrong, why is it only African leaders who are put on trial in The Hague? You only have power over them. You are the ones that should be in jail. But at the same time, we're talking about this translator's love life, and it's all in the title, Intimacies. It's all about how she feels intimate with people and in different situations, yet it is critical of the role of the United Nations, and it is kind of a little bit feminist, and it deals with the migration of people. This is a lady who is from New York and calls home Singapore despite only having lived there for 2 weeks and is currently living in The Hague. She's quite disaffected and not intimate with her surroundings, and it deals with that longingness to exist in a place. I'm not sure whether this book was doing so much that I couldn't quite put it all together, or this book wasn't doing quite enough, but I definitely really did enjoy reading this book, and I'm not really 100% sure what I think of it, and I actually really want to reread it before I rate it or review it. But it's definitely worthwhile reading it. It's probably sitting around the 4-star mark, but on a reread, I could quite easily see that dropping or jumping a star. And if you have read Intimacies yet, let me know what you thought. Let me know if you think that it kind of all comes together or not, or what else it's discussing. Is there a little key that I've missed? Let me know if you've read any of these books. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Was I too harsh on Heaven by Mieko Kawakami? Maybe I was. Was I too harsh on The Housekeeper and the Professor? I think I was really gentle on it for a book I didn't like. But let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And have a nice day.